The photograph was worn soft at the edges, creased from years of being folded and unfolded, studied in secret moments when Mama wasn't watching. Marco Marchetti didn't know who the man in the picture was, didn't know his name, his story, or why Mama's eyes went sad whenever she caught him looking at it. All he knew was what she'd told him, repeated like a prayer every night before bed. If you're ever in danger, real danger, find this man. He'll protect you. He'll know what to do. Tonight, Marco finally understood why. The Grand Meridian Hotel blazed with light, every window glowing like a jewel against the Manhattan skyline. Inside, the annual Vitale Foundation Gala was in full swing. Crystal chandeliers, champagne towers, men in tuxedos, and women in gowns that cost more than most people's cars. Marco's mother worked these events, had for years, coordinating the logistics from behind the scenes, invisible in her black uniform, while the beautiful people glittered and preened. Marco usually stayed home with Mrs. Patterson from down the hall, but the sitter had canceled and Mama couldn't miss work, so here he was, tucked in a storage closet with a tablet and strict instructions not to move. He'd heard the men before he saw them, voices in the hallway, speaking Italian, asking questions about a woman matching his mother's description. Marco's blood had gone cold. He knew that tone, had heard it in nightmares, in the warnings Mama whispered when she thought he was asleep. They'd found them. After 7 years of running, of hiding, of new cities and new names and never staying anywhere too long, they'd finally found them. Marco had crept to the door, peering through the crack just in time to see his mother round the corner. She'd frozen at the sight of the men, had locked eyes with Marco for one terrible second. Then she'd run. The men had followed, and Marco, remembering every lesson his mother had ever taught him, had pulled the photograph from his pocket and started searching for the face that matched. Now he stood at the entrance to the grand ballroom, 7 years old and terrified, scanning a sea of strangers for a man he'd never met. Security guards were moving toward him. A kid in jeans and a faded t-shirt didn't exactly blend in with the diamond-draped elite. Then he saw him, center of the room, surrounded by men who moved like shadows, deferring to his every gesture. Dark hair swept back from a face that matched the photograph exactly. Older now, harder, but unmistakably the same. Marco ran. He dodged a waiter, ducked under a woman's fur stole, and burst through the ring of guards with the desperate speed of a child who knew his mother's life depended on it. The guards lunged for him, but he was faster, smaller, driven by fear that gave him wings. He slammed into the man's legs and held on for dear life. "My mom said you'd protect me." The words tumbled out, breathless and terrified. "She said you'd know what to do. Please, please, they're hurting her. The bad men found us and they're hurting her." The ballroom had gone silent. 300 guests, frozen in place, watching a 7-year-old cling to the most dangerous man in New York. Luca Vitale looked down at the child attached to his legs. Dark eyes, dark hair. A stubborn jaw that Luca saw every morning in his own mirror, and clutched in one small fist, a photograph. Worn and creased and unmistakable. A photograph of himself, 11 years ago, smiling in a way he hadn't smiled since. "Where is your mother?" His voice came out rough, barely controlled. "The service hallway. The men. They were speaking Italian. They grabbed her and she told me to run." Luca didn't hear the rest. He was already moving, barking orders in rapid Italian, his men falling into formation around him. Someone tried to take the boy, but Marco screamed and clung tighter, and something cracked open in Luca's chest, something he'd spent 11 years trying to bury. "He stays with me," Luca commanded. "No one touches him." He swept the boy into his arms. God, he weighed nothing, this child who had his eyes and his jaw and existed against all odds, and strode toward the service entrance with murder in his heart. Sarah. She was alive. She hadn't. The baby. His baby. The thoughts fragmented, impossible to hold, as 11 years of grief and rage and carefully constructed lies collapsed around him. The service hallway was chaos. Two of Luca's advanced men were already there, weapons drawn, facing off against three men in dark suits. And between them, held by a fourth man with a knife at her throat, was a woman Luca would have recognized in any crowd, in any lifetime. Sarah Marchetti. She'd changed in 11 years. Thinner. Harder. The softness he remembered had been carved away by whatever life she'd been living, whatever running she'd been doing. But her eyes, those eyes found his across the chaos, and filled with something that looked like relief and terror in equal measure. Let her go. Luca's voice cut through the standoff like a blade. Now. The man with the knife laughed. Vitale! Should have known she'd run to you eventually. Dominic said she would, if we flushed her out. Dominic. Sarah's father. The man who had told Luca, 11 years ago, that Sarah had ended her pregnancy and wanted nothing to do with him. The man who had destroyed everything. Mama! Marco struggled in Luca's arms, reaching for his mother. Mama, I found him. I found the man in the picture. Sarah's face crumpled. Baby, I told you to hide. He said you'd protect us. Marco looked up at Luca with absolute devastating trust. You will, won't you? You'll protect my mama? The question hung in the air. 300 guests forgotten. 11 years of lies and grief suspended in a single moment. Luca looked at Sarah, at this woman who had haunted his dreams, who had broken him in ways he'd never recovered from, who had apparently spent 11 years raising his son in hiding. Yes, he said. The word came out like a vow. I'll protect her. Then he handed Marco to his most trusted guard and walked into the chaos with the cold, focused fury of a man who had just discovered that everything he believed was a lie. The fight was brief and brutal. Luca's men were better trained, better armed, and motivated by something that went beyond professional loyalty. The men who had come for Sarah were subdued in minutes. Alive, because Luca wanted answers, but not unharmed. The man with the knife was the last to fall. He dropped Sarah to reach for his weapon, and Luca put him on the ground with a single, devastating blow. Then Sarah was there. In his space. In his arms. Her face pressed against his chest and her whole body shaking with sobs. I'm sorry, she gasped. I'm so sorry. I didn't have a choice. My father said he'd kill you if I didn't disappear. He said he'd tell your family I ended the pregnancy. He made me... Stop. Luca's arms came around her, pulling her closer, his face buried in her hair. She smelled the same. After 11 years, she still smelled the same. We'll talk later. Right now, I need to know. His voice broke. That boy, Marco, is he? He's yours. The words came out fierce, desperate. He's always been yours. I could never. Luca, I've spent 11 years keeping him safe and making sure he knew that somewhere out there, his father would protect him if I couldn't. The world tilted, restructured itself around a truth that changed everything. He had a son, 7 years old. Dark eyes, stubborn jaw, brave enough to run through a ballroom full of strangers to find help for his mother. His son. Mama! Marco's voice cut through the haze. Luca released Sarah just in time for the boy to launch himself at her, wrapping his arms around her neck with a grip that said he would never let go. I found him, Marco said proudly, even as tears streamed down his face. I found the man in the picture just like you said. Sarah laughed through her own tears, holding her son like he was everything precious in the world. You did, baby. You were so brave. He said he'd protect us. Marco turned to look at Luca, those familiar dark eyes searching his face. Is he going to stay? Is he going to help us hide from Grandpa Dominic? Luca felt something shatter in his chest. Grandpa Dominic, the man who had stolen 11 years, who had turned Sarah into a fugitive and Marco into a secret, who had let Luca believe his child was dead. You're not hiding anymore, Luca said. His voice was steadier now, the shock crystallizing into something colder, harder, more dangerous. Neither of you. You're coming home with me. Sarah's eyes widened. Luca, your father has been lying to both of us for 11 years. He's taken everything. Our relationship, our son's childhood, years we can never get back. He reached out and cupped her face in his hands, the gesture achingly familiar despite the decade between them. I'm not letting him take anything else. Whatever happens next, we face it together. Marco watched this exchange with the solemn attention of a child who had learned young to read adults carefully. Are you my dad? He asked. The question was quiet, direct. The kind of question only a 7-year-old could ask without flinching. Luca looked at this boy, his boy, and felt the last of his defenses crumble. Yes, he said. I'm your dad. Marco considered this for a moment. Then he nodded, as if confirming something he'd suspected all along. Good, he said. I've been waiting to meet you. And Luca Vitale, who hadn't cried since he was 16 years old, felt tears slip down his face in a crowded service hallway while his son watched with those two knowing eyes. Some things were worth waiting for. Some things were worth fighting for. And some things, family, love, the truth, were worth burning the world to protect. The Vitale estate rose from the darkness like a fortress, all stone walls and wrought iron gates, and the kind of silence that came from absolute security. Marco pressed his face against the car window, eyes wide, exhaustion temporarily forgotten in the face of wonder. You live here? We live here, Luca corrected. The word felt strange in his mouth. We, us, ours. He'd spent 11 years perfecting solitude. Now he had a son in his back seat, and the woman he'd never stopped loving pressed against his side, and the world had tilted on its axis. Sarah hadn't spoken since they'd left the hotel. She sat rigid beside him, her hand gripping Marco's like a lifeline, her face pale in the passing streetlights. Luca wanted to reach for her, wanted to pull her close and promise that everything would be all right. But there were too many years between them, too many lies that still needed untangling. The car pulled through the gates and up the circular drive. Before Luca could open his door, the front entrance burst open and a small, fierce woman in a black dress came flying down the steps. Nonna Rosa, 83 years old, barely 5 feet tall, and more terrifying than any enemy Luca had ever faced. She'd raised him after his parents died, had held the family together through wars and losses and the slow erosion of hope. And she'd never forgiven Sarah for what she believed had happened 11 years ago. Luca Alessandro Vitale, Rosa's voice cracked like a whip. You leave in the middle of your own gala. Your men are refusing to tell me anything and... She stopped. Her eyes had found Marco, climbing out of the car with the careful movements of a child too tired to be fully coordinated. He looked up at her. Dark eyes, dark hair, that stubborn Vitale jaw, and Rosa's hand flew to her chest. Dio mio, she whispered. It cannot be. Nonna. Luca moved to her side, steadying her when she swayed. There's a lot I need to explain. That boy. Rosa's voice trembled. That boy has your face, your father's face, my husband's face. Her eyes, sharp despite her age, swung to Sarah emerging from the car. You told us, Dominic said. Dominic lied. Sarah's voice was steady, though Luca could see her hands shaking. About everything. He forced me to leave. Told Luca I'd ended the pregnancy when I was already 4 months along. I've spent 11 years hiding from him, trying to keep Marco safe. Rosa stared at her for a long, terrible moment. Then she looked at Marco again, this miracle child, this impossible gift, and her face crumpled. "Come here," she said, her voice breaking. "Come here, little one, let me see you." Marco glanced at his mother, who nodded. He approached Rosa slowly, uncertainly, this tiny, fierce woman who was looking at him like he'd hung the moon. Rosa cupped his face in her weathered hands, studying every feature with the intensity of someone memorizing a prayer. "What is your name?" she asked. "Marco. Marco Marchetti." He paused, then added with the careful honesty of childhood, "But I think maybe it should be Marco Vitale, if that's okay." Rosa made a sound, half laugh, half sob, and pulled him into her arms. Marco stiffened for just a moment, then melted into the embrace with the desperate relief of a child who had been running for too long. "More than okay," Rosa whispered into his hair. "More than okay, il mio tesoro. Welcome home." Luca watched his grandmother hold his son and felt something inside him rebuild itself from ruins. They moved inside, Rosa refusing to release Marco's hand, guiding him through hallways lined with portraits of ancestors he'd never known. Sarah walked beside Luca, close enough to touch, but maintaining careful distance. "She'll never forgive me," Sarah said quietly, "for what she thought I did." "She already has." Luca watched Rosa point out a painting to Marco, explaining which great-great-grandfather had commissioned it. "That woman has been mourning a great-grandchild she thought was dead for 11 years. You just gave her a miracle. She'd forgive you for almost anything right now." "And you?" Sarah stopped walking, forcing him to face her. "Will you forgive me?" The question hung between them, weighted with 11 years of grief and anger and the love that had never quite died. "There's nothing to forgive." Luca stepped closer, close enough to see the tears threatening to spill from her eyes. "You did what you had to do to survive, to keep our son safe. I spent 11 years hating you for a choice you never made." His voice roughened. "If anyone needs forgiveness, it's me. For not looking harder. For believing your father's lies. You couldn't have known." "I should have known you would never do that. Never leave without a word. Never." He stopped, the old wound still raw. "I knew you, Sarah, better than anyone, and I let your father convince me otherwise because it was easier than hoping." Sarah reached up, her fingers brushing his jaw in a touch so familiar it ached. "We both lost 11 years," she said. "We can't get them back. But maybe—" she hesitated. "Maybe we can stop losing more." Luca caught her hand, pressing it against his face, closing his eyes. "Stay," he said. "Not just tonight. Not just until the danger passes. Stay, Sarah. Let me be a father to our son. Let me—" his voice cracked, "let me try to be what I should have been all along. Luca, I know I have no right to ask. I know there's too much history, too much pain, but I'm asking anyway." He opened his eyes, letting her see everything, the grief, the hope, the love he'd never managed to kill. "Give me a chance. Give us a chance." Before she could answer, Marco's voice echoed down the hallway. "Mama, Nonna Rosa says there's a room that used to be Dad's when he was my age. Can I see it? Can I sleep there tonight?" Dad. The word hit Luca like a physical blow, sweet and devastating all at once. Sarah smiled through her tears. "I think that's your answer," she said. "He's already home. We both are." She rose on her toes and pressed a kiss to his cheek, soft, fleeting, a promise of conversation still to come. Then she walked toward their son, leaving Lucas standing in the hallway of his ancestors, feeling for the first time in 11 years like the future might hold something other than emptiness. The weeks that followed rewrote everything Luca thought he knew about himself. He'd spent 11 years becoming something hard, something cold. A man who ran an empire with ruthless efficiency and felt nothing beyond the satisfaction of power well wielded. His men respected him, his enemies feared him, and no one, not a single soul, had seen past the armor he'd constructed from grief and rage. Marco demolished that armor in days. "Dad, watch this!" became the soundtrack of Luca's mornings. Marco had discovered the estate's garden, with its maze of hedges and hidden fountains, and appointed himself its chief explorer. Every day brought new discoveries: a bird's nest in the old oak tree, a family of rabbits living beneath the rose bushes, a stone bench carved with initials from Vitali's long dead. And every discovery had to be shared, immediately, urgently, with the breathless enthusiasm of a child who had finally found someone to share things with. "He's never had this," Sarah explained one afternoon, watching from the terrace as Luca let Marco drag him toward some new treasure. A yard, space to run, someone to show things to. Her voice softened. "We were always in apartments, always temporary. He learned young not to get attached to places." "And people?" Sarah was quiet for a moment. "He's always been careful with people, watches them, reads them, decides who's safe and who isn't." She glanced at Luca, something vulnerable in her expression. "He decided you were safe before he ever met you, because I told him so. You trusted me, even after 11 years, even after—" "I never stopped trusting you." Her hand found his on the terrace railing, her fingers intertwining with his. "I stopped trusting everyone else, but never you." The touch sent electricity through Luca's veins. 11 years, and his body still remembered hers. Still leaned toward her like a plant toward sunlight. "Sarah." "Dad!" Marco's voice shattered the moment. "I found a frog. A huge one. Come see?" Luca laughed, a sound that still surprised him, rusty from disuse, and went to see the frog. Rosa, meanwhile, had appointed herself Marco's unofficial guardian of all things Vitale. She taught him the family history, pointing out ancestors in portraits and explaining who had done what, who had married whom, which great-uncle had been a hero and which had been a scoundrel. "This one," she said, stopping before a painting of a young man with dark eyes and a serious expression, "was your great-grandfather, my husband. He built this family from nothing." Marco studied the portrait with the solemnity it deserved. He looked sad. He carried many burdens, but he also knew great joy. Rosa touched the frame gently. "You have his eyes, you know. The same fire." "Mom says I have my dad's eyes." "Same thing." Rosa smiled and ruffled his hair. "The Vitale eyes. They see what others miss." At night, Luca found himself doing something he'd never imagined: reading bedtime stories. Marco had a collection of battered paperbacks that had traveled with him through 7 years of running, adventure stories mostly, full of heroes and villains and quests that always ended well. "Mom used to read these," Marco said one night, already half asleep, "but she does the voices wrong. You do them better." "I'll take that as a compliment." "Dad?" Marco's voice was drowsy, his eyes fluttering closed. "Are the bad men going to find us here?" Luca's chest tightened. He smoothed the hair back from Marco's forehead, marveling at the trust in that small, sleepy face. "No one is going to hurt you," he said. "Not ever. I promise." "Because you're the scariest person in the world?" A startled laugh escaped him. "Who told you that?" "I heard Nonna Rosa telling the cook. She said you make grown men cry." Marco yawned. "I think that's cool. My dad makes grown men cry." Luca stayed long after Marco fell asleep, watching his son breathe, feeling the weight of a promise he would die to keep. But promises, he was learning, were easier to make than to keep. The message came 3 weeks after the gala. Luca was in his study, reviewing reports on Dominic Marchetti's movements, when one of his men knocked. "Package for you, boss. No return address. Scanned clean." The box was small, elegant. Inside, nestled in black velvet, was a single photograph. Marco, playing in the garden, shot from somewhere beyond the estate's walls. On the back, in Dominic's distinctive handwriting, "She belongs to me. So does the boy. Return what's mine, or I'll take them back myself." Rage flooded Luca's system. White-hot, blinding, the kind of fury that had built empires and destroyed enemies. He crumpled the photograph in his fist and forced himself to breathe. Dominic had found them, had been watching, had gotten close enough to photograph Marco playing in what should have been the safest place in the world. "Double the perimeter guards," Luca ordered, his voice deadly calm. "No one in or out without my personal authorization. And find out how the hell someone got close enough to take this picture." "Yes, boss." Alone again, Luca smoothed out the crumpled photograph and stared at his son's smiling face. Marco was reaching for something out of frame. A butterfly, maybe, or one of the rabbits he'd befriended. Innocent, unaware, trusting that the walls around him would hold. Luca had failed to protect the people he loved once before. Had stood at his parents' graves and sworn it would never happen again. Had believed that strength and power and walls of stone could keep the darkness at bay. Now his son was in that darkness's crosshairs, and all the power in the world felt like nothing. He found Sarah in the library, curled in a window seat with a book she wasn't reading. She looked up when he entered, and he watched her face change as she read his expression. "He found us," she said. Not a question. Luca handed her the photograph, watched the color drain from her face, watched 11 years of running crash back into her eyes. "I'm not letting him take you." He crouched before her, taking her hands in his. "Do you understand? Whatever happens, whatever it takes, you and Marco are not going back to him. You don't know what he's capable of." "I know exactly what he's capable of. I've spent 11 years learning everything about your father, his business, his allies, his weaknesses." Luca's grip tightened. "He stole you from me once. He stole our son. He let me believe." His voice cracked. "He's not taking anything else. I won't let him." "Luca." Sarah freed one hand to cup his face, her touch gentle despite her fear. "I spent 11 years running because I was alone, because I didn't have anyone strong enough to stand against him." Her eyes met his, fierce and bright. "I'm not alone anymore." "No." He turned his head, pressing a kiss to her palm. "You're not." The kiss came naturally, inevitably. 11 years of longing collapsing into a single moment. Sarah's fingers curled into his hair as his hands found her waist, pulling her closer, learning the shape of her again after so long apart. She tasted like coming home, like every dream he'd forced himself to stop having. "I never stopped loving you," he murmured against her lips. "Not for a single day." "I know." She kissed him again, softer this time. "I never stopped either." When they finally pulled apart, foreheads pressed together, breathing ragged, Luca felt something settle into place inside his chest. A certainty that went beyond strategy or power. This was his family. His to protect. His to fight for. And anyone who tried to take them would learn exactly why grown men cried at the mention of his name. Dominic Marchetti made his move on a Sunday. Later, Luca would remember that detail with bitter irony. Sunday, the day of rest, of family, of the peaceful routines they'd been building in the fragile weeks since the gala. Marco had developed a tradition of Sunday breakfast with Nonna Rosa, helping her make pancakes while she told him stories about the old country. That morning, the kitchen smelled like vanilla and butter and the particular warmth of belonging. Then, the power went out. Luca was on his feet before the lights finished flickering, instinct overriding thought. His hand found his weapon. His eyes found Sarah across the room, her face gone pale. Marco. Her voice was steady despite her fear. Come here, baby. But Marco wasn't at the breakfast table anymore. He went to feed the rabbits, Rosa said, her weathered hands gripping the counter. Just 5 minutes ago. The garden. Luca was already running. The garden was chaos. 3 of his perimeter guards were down. Unconscious or dead, he couldn't tell. The hedge maze stretched before him, its familiar paths suddenly sinister, hiding threats around every corner. Marco! His voice echoed off the stone walls. Marco, answer me! Silence. Then, Dad! The scream came from the center of the maze, high and terrified. Luca plunged into the hedges, taking turns from memory, his heart pounding so hard he could barely breathe. He burst into the central clearing and froze. Dominic Marchetti stood beside the old fountain, one hand gripping Marco's arm, the other holding a gun. He was older than Luca remembered, silver-haired now, his face carved with the particular cruelty of a man who had spent decades taking what he wanted without consequence. Luca Vitale. Dominic's smile didn't reach his eyes. I was hoping we'd have a chance to talk. Father to father, as it were. Let him go. Luca's weapon was raised, aimed at Dominic's head, but the angle was wrong. Marco was too close, too small, too vulnerable. I don't think so. This boy is my blood, my legacy, and you've been keeping him from me. Dominic's grip tightened and Marco whimpered. Did my daughter tell you her sob story? How I forced her to leave? How I'm the villain in this little fairy tale? She told me the truth. She told you what she wanted to believe. Dominic's laugh was ugly. The truth is simpler. Sarah was a foolish girl who spread her legs for the enemy and got pregnant. I did what any father would do, protected my family's interests, removed the complication. I'm not a complication. Marco's voice was small but fierce. I'm a person. Your leverage. Dominic pressed the gun against Marco's temple and Luca's vision went red. That's all you've ever been. A bargaining chip, a way to control your mother, and, now, your father. What do you want? Luca forced the words out through a throat tight with rage. What I've always wanted. The Vitale shipping routes, the harbor contracts, everything your family has spent generations building. Dominic smiled. Give me that, and I'll let the boy live. Refuse, and, well, you've already lost one family. Surely you don't want to lose another. The words hit like bullets. Luca's parents, dead in a car bombing when he was 16, the baby he'd believed was never born. 11 years of emptiness, of grief, of becoming something cold because warmth had only ever led to loss. And now this man, this monster, was threatening to take everything all over again. Dad. Marco's voice cut through the rage. Dad, it's okay. Don't give him anything. Marco dash. You promised you'd protect me. Those dark Vitale eyes, so like his own, held steady despite the terror. I believe you. Whatever happens, I believe you. Something cracked open in Luca's chest. Not breaking, rebuilding. His son believed in him, trusted him. Even now, with a gun to his head, Marco believed his father would save him. And Luca would die before he proved that trust wrong. You want to talk about leverage, Dominic? Luca's voice went cold, the voice his enemies knew, the one that preceded destruction. Let me tell you what I have. Your 3 offshore accounts in the Caymans, frozen as of this morning. Your weapons shipment coming through Newark, intercepted by my men an hour ago. And your precious underboss, the one you trusted with your life? He smiled, and it was not a kind smile. He's been working for me for 6 months. For the first time, uncertainty flickered across Dominic's face. You're bluffing. I've had 11 years to prepare for this moment. 11 years to learn everything about you. Your business, your weaknesses, your pathetic little empire built on threats and stolen daughters. Luca took a step forward. Did you really think I wouldn't be ready? Stay back, or I'll... You'll what? Kill my son? Another step. If you do that, there's nothing stopping me from taking everything from you. Your money, your men, your miserable life. Is that really the trade you want to make? Dominic's hand was shaking now. Marco saw it. Luca could tell by the way his son's eyes widened, the way hope flickered across his face. Here's what's going to happen, Luca continued, his voice as inexorable as a tide. You're going to release Marco. You're going to walk away from this garden, and this city, and this family. And you're going to spend the rest of your life thanking God that I'm letting you live. You don't have the power to... Look around you. Dominic looked and saw what Luca had known was coming. His men, emerging from every corner of the maze, weapons trained on Dominic with lethal precision. 30 against 1. No escape, no leverage. Nothing but the cold reality of absolute defeat. Your choice, Luca said. My son, or your life. The gun wavered. Dominic's face contorted with rage, with desperation, with the particular fury of a man who had never been told no and couldn't accept it now. Then a new voice rang out across the clearing. Let go of my son. Sarah stepped out of the hedges, a gun in her hands, one of the weapons Luca kept in his study, the ones she must have found while he was running for the garden. Her aim was steady. Her eyes were fire. Sarah. Dominic's voice dripped with contempt. Put that down before you hurt yourself. I've spent 11 years running from you. 11 years hiding. 11 years letting you control my life through fear. She moved closer, her weapon never wavering. It ends today. You don't have the nerve. I have a son who thinks I'm brave, a man who loves me despite everything you tried to destroy. And I have 11 years of rage that I've been waiting to unleash. Her voice hardened. Let him go. Marco twisted suddenly, a sharp, desperate movement that caught Dominic off guard. The boy dropped to the ground, rolling away, scrambling toward his mother with the speed of a child who had been taught to run. Sarah caught him with one arm, pulling him behind her, her gun still trained on her father. And Luca moved. He crossed the distance in 3 strides, his weapon finding Dominic's chest before the older man could react. The gun fell from Dominic's hand. Luca kicked it away and pressed his own weapon harder against his enemy's heart. Give me one reason, he said quietly, why I shouldn't end you right now. Because I'm her father. Dominic's voice was desperate now, all pretense of power stripped away. Because she'll never forgive you. He's wrong. Sarah's voice came from behind him, steady and sure. I stopped being his daughter the day he took my son from you. Whatever you decide, Luca, I'm with you. The temptation was overwhelming. To pull the trigger. To end the threat permanently. To avenge 11 years of lies and loss and the childhood his son should have had. But Marco was watching. His son, who believed in him, was watching to see what kind of man his father really was. No, Luca said finally. That's too easy. He stepped back, lowering his weapon, and nodded to his men. Take him. Hold him at the facility. I want him alive. Alive and aware of exactly how thoroughly I've destroyed everything he built. He turned to look at Dominic one last time. You're going to spend the rest of your life watching me raise the grandson you tried to steal. Watching me love the daughter you treated like property. Watching everything you valued crumble to dust while my family thrives. He leaned closer, his voice dropping to a whisper. That's worse than death. And you deserve every second of it. His men dragged Dominic away, Luca turned to find Sarah and Marco standing together, both trembling, both alive, both looking at him like he was something worth believing in. Dad. Marco broke away from his mother and ran to Luca, slamming into his chest with enough force to knock the breath from his lungs. You came. You saved me. Just like you promised. Luca wrapped his arms around his son and held on like he would never let go. Always, he said, his voice cracking. I will always come for you. Both of you. Sarah reached them a moment later, her arms encircling them both, her face wet with tears. It's over, she whispered. It's finally over. Luca pulled her closer, pressing a kiss to her hair, feeling his son's heartbeat against his chest. No, he said. It's just beginning. And standing in the garden where his son had been threatened and his family had been forged, Luca Vitale finally understood what he'd been missing for 11 years. Not power, not control, not the cold comfort of an empire built on fear. Just this. Just them. Just love. Fierce and terrifying and worth every battle it took to protect. 1 year later, Marco Vitale turned 8 in a garden full of people who loved him. The party had been Nonna Rosa's idea. A proper celebration, she insisted, with balloons and cake, and every child from Marco's new school invited to run wild through the hedges he'd once been stolen from. She'd spent weeks planning, consulting with caterers and decorators, and anyone else who would listen, determined to give her great-grandson the birthday he deserved. She's making up for lost time, Sarah said, watching Rosa direct the placement of a towering chocolate cake with the intensity of a general commanding troops. 7 birthdays she missed. I think she's trying to fit them all into one party. Let her. Lucas slipped his arm around Sarah's waist, pulling her against his side. She's happy. I haven't seen her this happy since... He paused. Maybe ever. It was true. Rosa had transformed in the year since Marco's arrival, the grief that had shadowed her for so long finally lifting, replaced by a fierce, joyful devotion to the boy who carried her husband's eyes. She taught him Italian, fed him until he complained, and told anyone who would listen that her great-grandson was the smartest, bravest, most wonderful child in the history of the Vitali family. Marco, for his part, adored her completely. Dad, Mom! He came running across the lawn, his face smeared with frosting, a crown of paper and glitter perched crookedly on his dark hair. Tommy says you have a dungeon in the basement. Do we have a dungeon? Can I show him? We don't have a dungeon, Luca said, fighting back a smile. What about a torture chamber? Marco. What? Tommy's really interested in medieval history. Sarah pressed her face into Luca's shoulder, her body shaking with suppressed laughter. Luca maintained his composure through sheer force of will. No torture chambers, he said firmly. Go play in the maze, and try not to scare your friends with any more stories about our non-existent dungeon. Marco grinned, that familiar, mischievous grin that had become the brightest part of Luca's days, and ran off to rejoin his friends. He's thriving, Sarah said softly, watching their son disappear into the hedges. I keep waiting for the other shoe to drop, for him to struggle, to act out, to show some sign of everything we put him through. But he's resilient. Like his mother. Like his father. She turned in his arms, her hands finding his chest. You gave him this, Luca. Safety. Stability. A home he doesn't have to run from. We gave him this. Together. The word still sent warmth flooding through his chest. Together. After 11 years apart, they'd learned to be a unit again, not the teenagers they'd been, fumbling through first love, but something stronger. Something forged in loss and tempered by time. They'd taken it slow at first. Separate bedrooms, careful boundaries. The understanding that trust, once broken, had to be rebuilt brick by brick. But the bricks had stacked steadily, mortared with late-night conversations and shared meals, and the thousand small intimacies of raising a child together. Now Sarah's room was his room. Her life was his life. And the future he'd stopped believing in had become something real enough to touch. "I have something for you," he said. Sarah raised an eyebrow. "It's Marco's birthday, not mine." "Consider it an early gift." He reached into his pocket and withdrew a small velvet box. 11 years early, to be precise. Her breath caught. "Luca, I should have done this when we were 17. Should have put a ring on your finger and sworn to love you forever before your father had a chance to tear us apart." He opened the box, revealing a ring that had been in his family for 4 generations, a deep red ruby surrounded by diamonds, glowing like captured fire in the afternoon light. "I can't get those years back, but I can give you every year that's left." Sarah's eyes filled with tears. "Are you—" "Marry me, Sarah." He took her hand, sliding the ring onto her finger with hands that trembled despite his best efforts. "Be my wife. Let me spend the rest of my life being the partner you deserve, the father Marco deserves, the man I should have been all along." "You've always been that man." Her voice cracked. "Even when you didn't know it, even when you thought you'd lost everything, you were always the man I fell in love with." "Is that a yes?" She laughed through her tears, that beautiful, bright laugh he'd fallen for at 16 and never stopped loving. "Yes, 1,000 times yes. Yes for every year we lost and every year we're going to find." He kissed her then, deep and slow, tasting salt and joy and the particular sweetness of a love that had survived everything. Around them, the party continued, children shrieking, Rosa calling out commands, the ordinary chaos of a life finally being lived. Gross. They broke apart to find Marco standing a few feet away, his face scrunched in exaggerated disgust. "You're kissing at my birthday party. That's so embarrassing." "Get used to it," Luca said, pulling Sarah closer. "I plan to kiss your mother at every party for the rest of our lives." "Every party?" "Every single one." Marco considered this for a moment. Then his expression shifted, the theatrical disgust melting into something softer. "Does this mean you're getting married?" Sarah held up her hand, the ruby catching the light. "What do you think?" Marco's face split into a grin, that radiant, uncomplicated joy that only children could summon. He launched himself at them, wrapping his arms around both their waists, squeezing with all his 8-year-old strength. "Finally," he said, "I've been waiting forever." "Forever?" Luca ruffled his hair. "It's been 1 year." "That's forever when you're 8. Marco pulled back, his dark eyes shining. "Can I tell Nonna Rosa? She's going to cry. She cries at everything happy now." "Go ahead." Marco ran off, shouting for his great-grandmother, and moments later a shriek of joy echoed across the garden. Rosa appeared on the terrace, clutching Marco's hand, tears already streaming down her face. "Finally!" she cried, echoing her great-grandson. "I've been waiting forever." "Apparently we were the only ones who didn't see this coming," Sarah murmured. "Apparently." Luca pressed a kiss to her temple. "I don't mind. Some things are worth the wait." They were married in the fall, when the garden blazed with color and the air smelled of wood smoke and dying leaves. Rosa insisted on planning everything. Marco insisted on being ring-bearer and best man simultaneously, a role he took with tremendous seriousness. And Sarah walked down an aisle of scattered maple leaves to find Luca waiting for her, tears in his eyes and forever on his lips. "I promise to love you," he said, his voice steady despite the emotion cracking through it. "Through every danger, every doubt, every moment of joy and grief that life brings us. I promise to protect you, not because you need protecting, but because your heart deserves to be safe. I promise to trust you, Sarah answered, with my past, my future, and our son. I promise to stop running, to build something real, something permanent, something worthy of the family we've become. When the officiant pronounced them married, Marco cheered so loudly that the birds startled from the trees. Rosa wept into her handkerchief, and Luca kissed his wife for the first time, feeling the final piece of his broken heart slide into place. That night, after the guests had gone and Marco had been carried to bed still wearing his tiny tuxedo, Luca found Sarah on the terrace, where everything had started to change. "Happy?" he asked, wrapping his arms around her from behind. "More than I knew I could be." She leaned back against his chest. 12 years ago, I was a terrified teenager carrying a secret I thought would destroy everything. Now I'm standing in a garden, married to the love of my life, watching our son grow up safe and happy. She turned in his arms, her face luminous in the moonlight. "It doesn't feel real." "It's real." He kissed her softly. "All of it. And it's just the beginning." "Promise?" "Promise." Somewhere in the house, Marco was dreaming in a room that had been his father's, surrounded by the evidence of belonging, photographs on every surface, toys scattered across the floor, a family tree on the wall with his name added in fresh ink. Somewhere in the garden, Rosa was saying a prayer of thanksgiving, her heart finally full after years of mourning a great-grandchild she'd thought was lost. And on the terrace, wrapped in each other's arms, two people who had been torn apart by lies found their way back to a love that had never really ended. Some stories began with tragedy, with loss and lies and years of running from shadows. But some stories, the best ones, found their way to joy anyway, not despite the pain, because of it, because love, real love, was worth fighting for, worth waiting for, worth believing in, even when everything seemed lost. "My mom said you'd protect me," Marco had declared that night at the gala, a worn photograph clutched in his small fist. He had been right, and Luca Vitale would spend the rest of his life making sure that trust was never, ever misplaced. Thank you all for following this story. If you enjoyed it, please write in the comments where you're watching from. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this video, as your support is essential for me to continue creating content like this.